The lunch rush had thinned to a handful of regulars nursing cold coffee when Elena noticed the boy. He sat alone in the corner booth, the one with the cracked vinyl seat she kept meaning to report to management. Small for his age, 6, maybe 7, with dark hair that curled over his forehead and eyes too serious for a child. A mountain of a man in a black suit stood near the door, arms crossed, watching the street through the rain-streaked window. Security. The kind of security that didn't belong in a diner where the daily special was $6.99 meatloaf. Elena wiped down the counter and tried not to stare. None of her business. She had 40 minutes left on her shift, then a 3-hour window before her night class, and somewhere in between, she needed to call the hospital about Nana's latest round of tests. The bills were already piling up. $4,200 last month alone, and that was after insurance. Her tips today wouldn't cover a tenth of it. The boy hadn't touched his sandwich. He sat perfectly still, staring at the table, his small hands folded in his lap like he was waiting for something that would never come. She knew that posture. She'd invented it. Elena grabbed a cup of hot chocolate. On her, she'd figure out the register later, and crossed the floor. The man by the door tracked her movement but didn't intervene. "Hey there," she said softly, sliding the cup onto the table. "Thought you might like something warm. It's pretty cold out." The boy didn't look up. Didn't acknowledge her at all. She'd seen this before. In the group home, after her parents died. In the mirror, for years afterward. That complete withdrawal, like the soul had stepped back from the windows of the body and pulled all the curtains shut. Elena didn't push, didn't ask questions. Instead, she pulled the small sketchbook from her apron pocket, her constant companion, filled with half-finished drawings she made during slow shifts, and sat down across from him. Not too close. Close enough. She began to draw. Nothing elaborate. A simple cartoon cat with 2 big eyes and a crooked tail. She didn't look at the boy, didn't try to engage him. Just let the scratch of pencil on paper fill the silence. 3 minutes passed. 5. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. "That's not how cats look." Elena kept drawing. "No? How do they look?" Another long pause. She added whiskers to the cat, made them absurdly long and curly. "Their ears are different," the boy whispered. "More like triangles." "You're right." She slid the sketchbook toward him, along with the pencil. "Want to show me?" The bodyguard by the door shifted. Elena felt his attention sharpen, but she kept her focus on the boy. Small fingers reached out, hesitated. Then carefully, precisely, the boy drew 2 perfect triangular ears on top of her cartoon cat. His hand was steady. His breathing had changed, less shallow, more present. "That's much better," Elena said. "You're an artist." For the first time, the boy looked up at her. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, framed by lashes too long for a child. Something flickered in them. Surprise, maybe. Like he'd forgotten people could see him. "I'm Elena," she said. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, barely audible, "Marco." "Nice to meet you, Marco." She smiled, careful to keep it gentle, unpressured. "I'm here most afternoons if you ever want to draw together." No talking required. The bodyguard appeared at the table. "Time to go," he said, not unkindly. Marco slid out of the booth, but his eyes lingered on the sketchbook, on the cat with the triangle ears. "Keep it," Elena said, tearing out the page. "Every artist needs to keep their work." The boy took the paper like it was made of glass. He folded it carefully, precisely, and slipped it into his coat pocket. Then he was gone, ushered out into the gray afternoon by the mountain in the black suit. Elena watched them go, the sleek black car waiting at the curb, the driver who jumped out to open the door, the smooth choreography of money and power. A different world. A world that had nothing to do with her $11.50 an hour, and her grandmother's medical debt and her dreams of finishing her degree in child psychology before she turned 30. She went back to wiping tables and forgot about the boy with the sad eyes. 3 days later, a different man walked into the diner. Elena knew he was different the moment the door opened. Not because of his appearance, though that was striking enough. Tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled his charcoal suit like it had been sewn onto his body. Dark hair pushed back from a face that was all sharp angles and shadows. A jaw that could have been cut from marble. Eyes the color of black coffee, and just as bitter. No, she knew he was different because of the way the air changed when he entered, the way conversation stuttered and died, the way her manager, Rick, suddenly found urgent business in the back kitchen, the way the two men who flanked the stranger took positions by the door and the window without being told, their eyes scanning the room like they expected violence. The stranger walked directly to her. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct told her to step back, to look away, to make herself small and invisible the way she'd learned to do in the group home when the older kids got angry. But something held her in place. Stubbornness, maybe. Or stupidity. He stopped 2 feet away, close enough that she could smell him, something expensive and masculine, leather and cedar and a hint of smoke. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Elena? Not a question. Her name in his mouth sounded like a verdict. Can I help you? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He reached into his jacket pocket, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Her paper. Her cartoon cat with the triangle ears, now creased and worn like it had been folded and unfolded dozens of times. My son, the man said, his voice low and rough, hasn't spoken in 8 months. Not to me, not to his doctors, not to anyone. He held up the drawing. 3 days ago, he gave me this. He told me about the girl at the diner who drew with him. He asked me. The man stopped. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the granite. He asked me if we could come back. Elena's breath caught. Who are you? He demanded. What do you want? I'm a waitress, she said. I don't want anything. His eyes narrowed, searching her face like he could read her secrets written there. Everyone wants something. Then I guess I want to finish my shift and go home. She met his gaze, refusing to flinch. I didn't know who your son was. I just saw a kid who looked like he needed someone to sit with him. That's all. The man studied her for a long moment. The silence stretched, filled with the distant clatter of dishes and the hum of the ancient refrigerator case. Then he said, Have dinner with us. Tonight. Excuse me? My son wants to see you. I don't deny my son anything he asks for. His jaw tightened. Not anymore. It wasn't a request. Everything about his posture, his tone, the weight of his presence, it was a command wrapped in the thinnest veneer of civility. Elena should have said no. She should have told this man, whoever he was, whatever he was, that she wasn't for sale, that his money and his power meant nothing to her, that she had a life, and a grandmother and bills to pay and no room for complications. But she thought of Marco, the way he'd looked at her like she was the first person to see him in months, the careful way he'd folded that silly drawing. One dinner, she said, for Marco. The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those dark eyes. Interest, maybe, or the beginning of something far more dangerous. For Marco, he repeated. We'll see. The car that arrived for her that evening cost more than her annual salary. Elena knew this because she'd looked up the model on her phone during her break. A Rolls-Royce Phantom, sleek and black and utterly silent as it glided to a stop outside her apartment building. The driver who opened her door wore gloves, white gloves, like something out of an old movie. She'd changed out of her uniform into the nicest thing she owned, a simple black dress she'd bought secondhand for job interviews, paired with flats because her only heels had a broken strap she couldn't afford to fix. Standing next to that car, in front of her crumbling building with its graffiti-tagged door and broken buzzer, she felt like a fraud. The drive took 40 minutes, winding out of the city and into hills she'd only ever seen from a distance. The houses grew larger, the gates higher, the spaces between them wider. By the time the car turned onto a private road lined with cypress trees, Elena's palms were slick with sweat. The Vitali estate rose from the darkness like something out of a fever dream. Stone and glass and manicured gardens, lit by soft golden light that made it glow against the night sky. She counted windows, stopped at 30. The fountain in the circular drive was larger than her entire apartment. Luca Vitale was waiting at the door. He'd changed too, though his version of casual was a black shirt open at the collar and trousers that probably cost more than her rent. Without the suit jacket, she could see the breadth of his shoulders, the way the fabric stretched across his chest. A thin gold chain glinted at his throat. "You came," he said. "I said I would." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, that she'd kept her word. He stepped aside to let her enter, and Elena walked into a world she didn't belong in. The foyer alone could have swallowed her apartment whole. Marble floors, a sweeping staircase, artwork on the walls that looked old and important, and probably cost more than she'd earn in a lifetime. She tried not to stare. Failed. "Marco is in the dining room," Luca said, watching her take it all in. "He's been asking about you all day." "You could have just brought him back to the diner." "I could have." He didn't explain why he hadn't. Instead, he placed a hand on the small of her back. Barely a touch, but she felt it like a brand, and guided her forward. Marco was sitting at a table designed for 20, his small body dwarfed by the high-backed chair. But when he saw Elena, his face transformed. Not a smile, not quite, but something close, something hopeful. "Elena?" He said her name like he'd been practicing it. "Hey, artist." She crossed to him, ignoring the formality of the room, and crouched beside his chair. "I brought you something." She pulled a small sketchbook from her bag, purchased that afternoon with money she should have saved for groceries, along with a set of colored pencils. Nothing fancy, but Marco's eyes went wide like she'd handed him treasure. "For me? Every artist needs supplies?" Dinner was strange. Exquisite food she couldn't name, served by silent staff who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Luca sat at the head of the table watching her interact with his son with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Marco showed her his drawings, page after page of dark shapes and empty rooms, and she praised each one, asking questions, letting him lead. By dessert, the boy was leaning against her arm, drowsy and content. "He should go to bed," Luca said quietly. A woman appeared, the nanny, Elena assumed, and gently extracted Marco from her side. He went reluctantly, clutching his new sketchbook, but paused at the door. "Will you come back?" he asked. Elena looked at Luca. His face was unreadable. "We'll see," she said, hating herself for the non-answer. After Marco was gone, Luca led her to a study lined with books and shadows. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey without asking if she wanted one, handed her a glass, and sat behind a desk that looked like it belonged to a king. "I had you investigated," he said. "Elena Marino, 23, orphaned at 8, raised in the foster system until you aged out at 18, currently working 2 jobs while pursuing a degree in child psychology. You live alone, except for visits to your grandmother at St. Catherine's Hospice Care." He paused. "You owe $47,000 in medical debt." Elena's blood ran cold. You had no right. I have a right to know who's spending time with my son. His voice was flat, unapologetic. You could have been anyone, a reporter, a spy, someone sent by my enemies to get close to him. I'm a waitress, she said through clenched teeth. I told you that. You're more than that. He leaned forward, those dark eyes pinning her in place. You're the first person in 8 months to reach my son. The first person since his mother died that he's wanted to see again. His jaw tightened. I need to know why. I don't know why. Her voice cracked despite herself. I saw a kid who was hurting. I know what that looks like. I know what it feels like to be invisible, to want someone to just sit with you without demanding anything. She set down the whiskey glass, her hand trembling. That's all I did. I sat with him. Luca was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Softer. Almost human. I'm offering you a job. Live here. Be Marco's companion. Help him the way his therapists can't. He named a salary that made her head spin, more than both her jobs combined, plus room and board. Your grandmother's medical bills will be paid, all of them. Elena's heart stopped. Why would you do that? Because my son smiled today, for the first time in 8 months. Luca's mask slipped, just for a moment, and she saw the exhaustion beneath. The grief. The desperate love of a father watching his child drown and unable to reach him. I would burn the world to see him smile again. Paying your grandmother's bills is nothing. She should say no. Every rational thought screamed at her to run, to escape this man and his money and his dangerous world before it swallowed her whole. But $47,000, Nana's care, Marco's hopeful face. I have conditions, she heard herself say. Luca's eyebrow rose. Name them. I finish my degree, I keep my classes. Done. I'm not a prisoner. I come and go as I please. Within reason. You'll have security. And you don't get to investigate me again. You want to know something. You ask me. A long pause. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or curiosity. Agreed. Elena extended her hand. Then we have a deal, Mr. Vitale. He took it. His grip was warm and firm, his palm calloused in ways she didn't expect from a man who wore $1,000 suits. He held on a beat too long. Luca, he said, if you're going to live in my home, you'll use my name. Standing in that study, her hand engulfed by his, Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She'd just made a deal with a devil she didn't understand, for reasons she couldn't fully explain. But when she thought of Marco's face, that fragile, flickering hope, she knew she'd make the same choice again, even if it destroyed her. The first week in the Vitale estate felt like learning to breathe underwater. Elena's room was larger than her entire apartment, with windows that overlooked gardens she could have wandered for hours and a bathroom with heated floors and a tub deep enough to swim in. The closet had been stocked before her arrival. Clothes in her size, simple but elegant, with tags she carefully removed so she wouldn't see the prices. She kept her old black dress hanging in the back anyway, a reminder of who she was. Marco became her shadow. Every morning he appeared at her door with his sketchbook, waiting for her to finish breakfast so they could draw together. They worked in the sunroom mostly, surrounded by plants and light, their pencils scratching in comfortable silence. Some days he talked, fragments of sentences, memories that surfaced like debris after a shipwreck. His mother liked roses. His mother sang to him in Italian. His mother had hair like Elena's, long and dark. She learned not to push, learned to let the words come when they were ready, to sit with the silences that stretched between them like bridges he was still building. Luca watched from a distance. She felt his presence like a change in pressure. the prickle at the back of her neck when he stood in doorways, the weight of his gaze during meals. He asked her questions sometimes, careful ones, about Marco's progress, about her classes, about her grandmother. "She's stable," Elena told him one evening, 3 weeks into her stay. They were in his study again, the room she'd come to think of as his territory, leather and wood, and the faint smell of cigars he never seemed to smoke. "The new treatment is helping?" "Good." He was standing by the window, his back to her, silhouetted against the dying light. "You visited her yesterday." It wasn't a question. Of course he knew. The security detail that accompanied her everywhere reported to him. "She asked about my new job," Elena said. "I told her I was working for a nice family, helping with their son." Luca turned. The sunset caught his face, softening the hard lines, and for a moment he looked almost young, almost vulnerable. "Is that what you think we are? A nice family?" "I think Marco is a good kid who's been through something terrible. I think he's starting to heal." She paused. "I think you love him more than you know how to show." Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or recognition. He crossed the room, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. Close enough that she could see the individual threads of silver at his temples, the faint scar that traced his jaw. "You see too much," he murmured. "Maybe you're not as hidden as you think." The air between them thickened. Elena's heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She should step back, should remember who he was, what he was, the 100 reasons this was dangerous. She didn't move. Luca lifted his hand. For one breathless moment, she thought he would touch her face. Instead, he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers barely grazing her skin. "Marco has a session with his therapist tomorrow," he said, his voice rough. "He wants you there." Then he stepped back, and the moment shattered like glass. Elena fled to her room and didn't sleep for hours. Over the following weeks, she learned the rhythms of the estate, the staff who kept it running, Rosa, the housekeeper who clucked over Elena like a worried hen, Gianni, the chef who snuck her pastries and asked about her classes, the rotating guards whose names she slowly memorized. She learned that Luca left for work at odd hours and returned with shadows under his eyes. She learned not to ask questions. She learned that Marco's mother had been killed in a car accident, that Marco had been in the back seat, that he'd stopped speaking the day they buried her. "He blames himself," Luca told her one night, his voice hollow. They were sitting in the garden, watching Marco chase fireflies across the lawn, a game Elena had invented, one that made him laugh. "He thinks if he'd been quieter, if he hadn't distracted her." He stopped, his hands clenched on his knees. "Children always blame themselves," Elena said softly. "It's how they make sense of things they can't control." "How do I fix it?" "You can't fix grief. You can only walk through it with him." She watched Marco cup a firefly in his palms, his face lit with wonder. "You're already doing that, even if it doesn't feel like enough." Luca was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "My wife and I, we weren't happy. Not for a long time. But she was Marco's world. And now he looks at me like I'm a stranger." He exhaled. "Sometimes I think he blames me too." Elena didn't think. She reached out and covered his hand with hers. Luca went still. She felt the tension in him, the surprise. Then, slowly, his hand turned beneath hers, and his fingers intertwined with her own. They sat like that until Marco came running back, a firefly glowing in his cupped hands, and Elena pulled away before the boy could see. But something had shifted. Something had cracked open. And Elena was too deep now to find her way back. The call came at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Elena jolted awake to her phone buzzing on the nightstand, her heart already racing before she saw the caller ID. St. Catherine's Hospice. Miss Marino? The voice was calm, professional, terrible. There's been an incident. Your grandmother. She was dressed and running down the stairs before the nurse finished speaking. One of the night guards intercepted her in the foyer, his hand on her arm, his voice low and urgent. Miss Marino, you can't leave without... My grandmother is in the hospital. Her voice cracked. Let me go. What's happening? Luca appeared on the stairs, barefoot, wearing only a t-shirt and sweatpants. His hair was disheveled, his eyes sharp with concern. He looked human. He looked like someone she could trust. It's Nana. Elena's vision blurred with tears. Someone broke into the hospice. They hurt her. She's being transferred to the ER. Luca's expression went cold. Not at her. She understood that now, could read the difference. This was the other Luca, the one who commanded men and made enemies disappear. The one she'd tried so hard not to think about. Which hospital? St. Mary's. Donovan. Luca's voice cut through the room. A man materialized from the shadows, tall, red-haired, with the build of a boxer. Wake the team. I want to know who did this within the hour. Sir? And get the car. We're going to the hospital. Elena stared at him. You don't have to. Someone attacked your grandmother. His jaw was granite, his eyes burning. You're under my protection. That means she is too. He was already moving, grabbing a jacket from a hook, sliding his feet into shoes. No one touches what's mine. The words should have frightened her. Instead, they wrapped around her like armor. In the car, Luca made calls. His voice was low, rapid, switching between English and Italian. She caught fragments, names she didn't recognize, orders she didn't understand. The word Castellano, repeated like a curse. Who are they? She asked when he hung up. Luca's hand found hers in the darkness. His grip was bruising, desperate. An old enemy, he said. One who just made the last mistake of his life. Elena stared out the window at the city lights blurring past, her grandmother's face swimming in her mind. She'd walked into Luca's world thinking she could keep one foot in her own. She understood now how naive that had been. The war had found her, and there was no going back. Nana survived, bruised, shaken, with a fractured wrist and a gash across her forehead that required 12 stitches, but alive. Elena sat beside her hospital bed for 3 days, holding her grandmother's papery hand, watching her sleep. Luca's men stood guard outside the door. 2 of them, rotating in shifts, their presence a constant reminder of the world Elena had stumbled into. You should go home, Nana said on the 3rd morning, her voice thin but stubborn. That boy needs you. You need me more. I need you to stop looking at me like I'm dying. Nana squeezed her hand with surprising strength. I've survived worse than some thug with a grudge, Elena. I survived your grandfather. God rest his stubborn soul. Her eyes sharpened, seeing too much the way they always had. This man you work for. He's the one, isn't he? The one who's been paying my bills. Elena's throat tightened. Nana. Don't lie to me, child. I'm old, not stupid. Nana studied her face. You care about him. I care about his son. Mm-hmm. The sound was deeply skeptical. And when he looks at you? When he moved you into his house and put guards on my door and flew in specialists from New York to check on my treatment? Nana's weathered face softened. A man doesn't do that for his son's babysitter. Elena didn't have an answer. She'd been asking herself the same question for weeks. The following evening, Luca came to the hospital himself. He stood in the doorway of Nana's room, uncertain in a way Elena had never seen him, a bouquet of flowers in his hands that looked absurdly delicate against his broad frame. Mrs. Marino. His voice was formal, careful. I wanted to apologize. In person. What happened to you? It was because of me. Because of who I am. Nana looked at him for a long moment. Then she gestured to the chair beside her bed. Sit down, Mr. Vitale, and call me Rosa. If you're going to be courting my granddaughter, we should be on a first-name basis. Nana. Elena's face burned, but Luca sat. And for the next hour, Elena watched the most powerful man she'd ever met submit to interrogation by a 78-year-old woman who weighed 90 pounds soaking wet. Nana asked about his family, his son, his intentions. She asked about his business, the legitimate parts, if there are any, and what he planned to do about the men who'd hurt her. Luca answered every question, honestly, as far as Elena could tell. When Nana finally released him, her eyes were thoughtful. You'll do, she said. But if you hurt her, I'll find a way to make you pay. Don't think I won't. I believe you, Luca said, and he sounded like he meant it. That night, after Elena had kissed Nana goodbye and promised to return in the morning, Luca drove her back to the estate himself. The car was silent except for the hum of the engine, the space between them charged with everything unspoken. Castellano, Luca said finally. Victor Castellano. He runs the operation on the south side. We've been enemies for 15 years, since before I took over from my father. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. He's been probing for weaknesses, looking for leverage. When his men saw you visiting the hospice, they thought they'd found it. Why? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Why would hurting my grandmother give him leverage over you? Luca was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Because he's not stupid either. He sees what everyone sees. He glanced at her, his eyes dark and burning. He sees that you matter to me. Elena's heart stopped. Started again, pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Luca! I'm handling it, he said, his jaw tight. Castellano will learn what happens to people who touch what I protect. I need you to stay at the estate, you and Marco. Don't leave for any reason. For how long? Until it's done. She wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers, explanations, a timeline, but she saw the exhaustion in his face, the weight on his shoulders, and she understood that this was what love looked like in his world. Not flowers and poetry, protection, sacrifice, war. Okay, she said. I'll stay. His hand found hers across the console. He lifted it to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, gentle, reverent, completely at odds with everything she knew about him. Thank you, he murmured against her skin, for trusting me. 3 days later, they came for Marco. Elena was in the sunroom with him, working on a drawing of the garden, when the first gunshot shattered the afternoon silence. Marco screamed, a high, terrified sound that cut through her like a knife, and Elena moved on instinct, grabbing him, pulling him down behind the heavy oak table. Stay here, she whispered, her voice steady even as her hands shook. Don't move. Don't make a sound. More gunshots. Shouting. The sound of glass breaking somewhere in the house. Marco was crying, silent tears streaming down his face, his small body trembling against hers. She wrapped her arms around him and held on, her mind racing. The panic room. Luca had shown it to her, a reinforced space behind the library. If she could get Marco there. The sunroom door burst open. The man who entered was tall and thin, with a face like a hatchet and eyes that held nothing human. He smiled when he saw them, a cold reptilian expression that made Elena's blood turn to ice. There you are, he said, the boss's little pets. Elena stood, putting herself between Marco and the intruder. Her legs shook. Her heart screamed at her to run, But she planted her feet and lifted her chin and refused to move. "You don't want to do this," she said. "Oh, I really do." The man raised his gun. "Castellano sends his regards." The world slowed. Elena saw the gun, saw the man's finger tighten on the trigger, saw Marco's terrified face behind her. She thought of Nana, of her parents, of all the people she'd lost and all the ways she'd learned to survive. She thought of Luca. And then she moved. She grabbed the heavy ceramic vase from the table beside her and hurled it at the intruder's face. It connected with a sickening crack, and the gun went off. Wild, the bullet shattering a window somewhere to her left. Elena didn't stop to think. She grabbed Marco's hand and ran. Through the door, down the hallway. Past bodies she didn't let herself look at. Through chaos she didn't let herself process. Marco's hand was sweaty in hers, his breathing ragged, but he kept up. Brave boy. Brave, brave boy. The library. The hidden panel. She slammed her palm against the sensor and the door slid open, revealing the reinforced room beyond. She shoved Marco inside. "Stay here," she gasped. "Don't open this door for anyone except me or your father. Promise me." "Elena, promise me, Marco." His face was white with terror, but he nodded. "I promise." She sealed the door and turned to face the hallway. The hatchet-faced man was coming. Blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, fury twisting his features, gun raised. "You're going to regret that," he snarled. Elena's back hit the wall. She had nowhere to run, nothing left to throw. She was going to die here, in this hallway, and Marco was going to hear it happen. She closed her eyes. The gunshot was deafening, but the pain never came. Elena's eyes flew open. The hatchet-faced man was crumpling to the ground, a red bloom spreading across his chest. And standing at the end of the hallway, gun still raised, chest heaving, was Luca. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. His hands cupped her face, tilting it up, his eyes wild as they searched hers. "Are you hurt?" His voice cracked. "Elena, are you hurt?" "No." The word came out strangled. "Marco, he's in the panic room. He's safe." Luca's forehead dropped to hers. She felt him shaking. This man who commanded armies, who killed without hesitation, who had just saved her life. Shaking. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. When Donovan called, when he said they'd breached the house, his voice broke. "I thought I lost you." "I'm here." She gripped his shirt, pulling him closer. "I'm here." He kissed her. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't careful. It was desperate and consuming, his mouth claiming hers like she was oxygen and he was drowning. Elena kissed him back with everything she had, all the fear and relief and longing she'd been carrying for weeks, all the walls she'd built crumbling to dust. When they finally broke apart, his eyes were wet. "I love you," he said. "I know I shouldn't. I know I have no right. But I love you, Elena. I think I have since that first day in the diner, when you looked at me like I was just a man." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I love you too. God help me. I love you too." Behind them, the sounds of the house settling, the aftermath of violence being managed, a world she didn't fully understand. But in that moment, with Luca's arms around her and Marco safe behind a reinforced door, Elena didn't care about any of it. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. 6 months later, Elena stood in the garden and watched Marco chase butterflies through the roses. He was laughing. Not the quiet, tentative sounds of those first weeks, but real laughter, bright and loud and free. The kind of laughter that echoed off the stone walls of the estate and made the gardeners smile. The kind that made Elena's heart swell until she thought it might burst. So much had changed since that terrible day. Victor Castellano was gone. She didn't ask how, didn't want to know the details. The threat had been neutralized, Luca said. His empire was secure. His family was safe. Their family. Elena still marveled at the word, at the way it had come to include her so completely, so naturally, like she'd always been meant to be here. She'd finished her degree in May, walking across the stage to receive her diploma while Luca and Marco cheered from the audience. Nana had watched via video call from her new room at a private care facility upstate, the best in the country, with gardens she could walk in and staff who treated her like royalty. "You spoil her," Elena had told Luca. "She's your grandmother," he'd replied, as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. Now Elena felt his presence before she heard him. That familiar shift in the air, the warmth that spread through her chest whenever he was near. His arms wrapped around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest, and she leaned into him without thinking. "What are you doing out here?" His voice was low, intimate, meant only for her. "Watching our son." The word still felt new on her tongue. The adoption had been finalized just last month, a stack of papers that made official what had been true in her heart for much longer. Marco was hers now. Legally, irrevocably, completely. "Our son," Luca repeated. She could hear the smile in his voice. "I like the sound of that." She turned in his arms, tilting her face up to look at him. The late afternoon sun caught the silver at his temples, the lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled. He smiled so much more now. They all did. "I have something for you," he said. "You're always giving me things. You know I don't need." "Elena." He pressed a finger to her lips, silencing her. His eyes were serious now, intent. "Let me do this. Please." She nodded, her heart beginning to race. Luca stepped back, reached into his pocket, and then, slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself to one knee. Elena's breath caught. The garden seemed to fall silent around them. Even Marco had stopped running, watching from a distance with wide, knowing eyes. "I've done terrible things," Luca said quietly. "I've built an empire on blood and shadows. I never expected to deserve something good, something pure." He opened the velvet box in his hands, revealing a ring that caught the sunlight. A simple diamond, elegant and timeless, nothing like the ostentatious displays of wealth she'd learned to associate with his world. "And then you walked into that diner and looked at my son like he mattered, like he was worth seeing." His voice roughened. "You looked at me the same way, like I was more than what I'd done, like I could be better." Tears blurred her vision. She didn't try to stop them. "You've made me better, Elena. You and Marco. You've given me something I never thought I'd have. A home. A family. A reason to be more than just a name people fear." He held up the ring, his hand steady even as emotion cracked his voice. "I'm asking you to stay, not because I need you, though God knows I do, but because I want to spend the rest of my life earning the way you look at me, every single day." He took a breath. "Elena Marino, will you marry me?" She was crying openly now, tears streaming down her cheeks, her heart so full it ached. "Yes," she whispered. Then stronger. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." Luca slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. He'd probably had her measured somehow. The impossible man. And then he was standing, lifting her off her feet, spinning her through the garden while she laughed and cried and held on tight. Marco came running, crashing into them both, his small arms wrapping around their legs. "Does this mean Elena's staying forever?" he asked, his face tilted up toward them, bright with hope. Luca looked at her. His eyes held everything, love, gratitude, the promise of a future she'd never dared to imagine. Forever? Elena said, bending to press a kiss to Marco's forehead. I'm not going anywhere. That evening, as the sun set over the estate and painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, Elena sat on the terrace with her family. Marco was curled between them, drowsy and content, his sketchbook open in his lap. Luca's hand rested on her knee, his thumb tracing absent patterns on her skin. She thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, exhausted, struggling, invisible. She thought about the cracked vinyl booth where she'd first seen a sad-eyed boy and the cartoon cat that had changed everything. Sometimes the universe didn't ask permission. Sometimes it simply reached down and rearranged your life, setting you on a path you never would have chosen but couldn't imagine leaving. Elena leaned her head against Luca's shoulder and watched the stars emerge, one by one, above the only home she'd ever truly known. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer alone. She was loved. She was chosen. She was exactly where she belonged. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is essential for me to continue creating content like this.